There's my cat. Today we're going to talk to you about society, culture, and reform, which is chapter 11 in your AMSCO book. My name is Mr. Kufs. I just got done doing some snow blowing on a really snowy day, and here I am to talk to you about this chapter. This chapter is what we call the antebellum period, which is the period in American history before the Civil War, and we're going to talk 1820 to 1860 about society, culture, and reform. Let's start with society in general and talk about religion. In this era, we have what we call the Second Great Awakening, a religious revival of sorts. You remember the First Great Awakening with Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards? Well, God is angry again, and people are running to their faith, and we have what are called evangelicals who are going out and evangelizing or selling the virtue of religion, of Christianity to the masses. You've got a guy named Timothy Dwight who's training preachers at Yale. You've got a guy named Cartwright who's going and speaking in tents and to big, large gatherings about the virtues of Jesus Christ and about becoming saved, accepting Christ as a personal Savior. Religion is the backbone of this era because America's settled in and it's post-war and we're looking more inward than we're looking more at organized religion. We have a new faith called the Mormons, or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They're led by a man named Joseph Smith, who dies, and then a man named Brigham Young takes them over, and he takes them to the Great Salt Lake. And they have some, at this point, some views that seem controversial or out of step with other Christians, such as polygamy, and they're kind of banished, and they find their haven out in, of all places, Utah. You also have a lot of utopian communities. What is utopia? Utopia is trying to find the perfect society. And most of these utopian experiments, oh, the cat just ran away. Bye, Frankie. Most of these utopian experiments fade away. What ends up happening is that, people try these social experiments of communal living, and that's like everybody sharing or equally distributing the wealth, and then people don't pull their weight. And there's a lot of interesting groups that I expect you to know from this chapter that include the Shakers and the Oneida community and John Humphrey Noyes and Robert Miller and really, you need to be in great detail of knowledge with all those names to get an understanding of utopia. As a part of that, there's a movement called Transcendentalism. The Transcendentalists are a group of people, mostly in New England, where they hang out at Brook Farm till it burns down, and they're kind of like the coffee shop philosophers at Starbucks in big cities today. Except, at this point, they're obviously not in a coffee shop. They're just hanging out with each other and talking about man and nature and the connection of man and nature. The two most famous are Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. Henry David Thoreau goes out and lives in a cabin behind his house in the woods for a couple years and then writes about it, which is an interesting little bit of writing, I guess. It really, if you look at Transcendentalism, it's kind of a touchy-feely modern way of, if we were looking at it today, we'd say that Transcendentalism is maybe a lot like the hipsters of today, maybe on college campuses, and looking at America with like a philosophical vantage point of man and nature. The rest of the chapter gets into reform. And that means righting the wrongs. It talks about prison reform. The Auburn City Prison, which is the city that I'm sitting in right now, the Auburn prison experiment in the early 1800s was silence. And really, it became a penitentiary where they worked hard, and it was more about rehabilitation than punishment. It talks about mental institutions. There's a name you need to know, Dorothea Dix, D-I-X. She walked into a mental institution and saw that they were treating people that were physically and mentally disabled horribly. And she wanted to change that and made it her mission in life to change that. Then there's reform for the blind, reform for the deaf, and reform for dietary needs, reform for the way that people dressed, reform in every area. But the two biggest areas of reform are, one, women's rights, and this is the era of the Seneca Falls Convention in Elizabeth Cady Stanton, which is 20 minutes from where I'm sitting right now on Route 5 and 20, that route didn't exist at that point. She had a gathering of women who wanted equality, and they wanted more than anything the right to vote, women's suffrage. And this is the beginning in 1848 of the women's suffrage movement. And their Declaration of Sentiments said, hey, Thomas Jefferson, all men and women are created equal. And this is where we see Lucretia Mott and the Grimke sisters and these other women advocating for suffrage, saying, hey, if we're going to push for abolition, which obviously we are, we also have to push for women's issues. They go hand in hand. Speaking of abolition, that's the biggest part of this chapter. It gets into Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad. It gets into Frederick Douglass, the escaped slave. It talks about Ralph Waldo Emerson, who published The Liberator, and these passionate abolitionists who wanted to end slavery in this country, and they emerge in this unit. So you've got a lot of work to do. There's a lot to learn. I'm going to stop right there and let you guys look this chapter over and delve a little deeper in this until we meet again. Thank you. It's Mr. Kufs signing off.